Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing the very first post-processing video on my YouTube channel, and I am very excited about this because for me personally, post-processing is one of the most exciting parts of being a photographer because it's where you can really sit down and bring your vision to life and create this image that you saw in the field and bring it back and really just showcase your view or your perspective or the composition or whatever feelings you had when you were at this place. It's really exciting and really one of my all-time favorite things about being a photographer, from being back in the darkroom when I was shooting film all the way up till digital photography and where I am today. Editing images and post-processing has just been top of the top for me. I just absolutely love this part of photography, and I'm excited to share this with you guys. So, little side note here before we get into the actual video, I did end up running into a few problems with the initial videos that I had produced. This is my third time making this video, and unfortunately I ran into a couple issues on the first video with some file corruption. In the second video, there was an issue with the colors. So I've just had a heck of a time learning how to create these tutorials, these videos where I'm recording my screen and sharing this stuff with you guys. But I think I have all the bugs worked out this time around. I really hope so anyways. But either way, we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna jump in, and I do apologize that the video is a week late, but it's a learning experience and we're all learning every day. So let's go ahead, jump in here and discuss the image that you see here on the screen. So the photo that I'm going to be editing for you guys today, this is one of my all-time favorite images that I captured back in 2021 in Ontonagon, Michigan. This is in the Upper Peninsula, and it is just an incredible image, and understandably right now it probably doesn't really look all that incredible. Now, a few things about what I'm doing in the field and how I'm preparing myself for the digital darkroom, because that's really going to set the stage for what happens next. The first, and I think most important thing, is that I am shooting in Camera Raw. You'll see down here, .nef indicates a Nikon RAW format image, or Nikon electronic format, I think it actually stands for. But a RAW image, or shooting in RAW, allows you to come back into the digital darkroom and make the adjustments that you see necessary to ultimately bring the image back to life and add everything back that was there when you captured the shot. It gives you full control over your photographic process from start to finish. If you don't shoot RAW, I strongly recommend shooting in RAW and learning how to process RAW images, because it does help tremendously in producing these landscape photos and post-processing them properly on the or in the digital darkroom. Next, you'll see that the image does look pretty flat. And that's because when I'm out shooting, I'm generally shooting in a flat or neutral profile. The reason I do this is because it's going to give me the maximum dynamic range possible in shooting these photos and capturing the data out in the field correctly. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that, but I personally like to just shoot in that neutral flat profile. If you are shooting in RAW, ultimately you can really shoot in whatever profile you want to shoot in and make the adjustments later, but I like to just start this way. It makes my workflow much simpler. Now let's go ahead and open this image up and dive right into the edit. This is where the editing begins, and this is where ultimately you're going to set yourself up to dual process a RAW image to create a final photo. Now, I'm sure some of you guys have probably heard the term dual process. That's nothing new. It's nothing that is groundbreaking or anything like that. but I do feel that everyone kind of does it their own way. Now, if you're following along and you're doing this in Bridge or using Adobe Camera Raw, I've done my best to go ahead and reset the workspace to resemble the base workspace as closely as possible. If you're following along in Lightroom, all of these adjustments are going to be the same adjustments that are available in Lightroom. You can make the same adjustments and basically do the same things in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. Looking at this, before we get started here, I want to show you guys a few things. When I first bring the image in, I'm specifically going to look right here at the profile. Now, the first step for my workflow is always to change this from Adobe Color to Adobe Landscape. And you'll see that just with that one change, we bring a lot of color back into the image, and we bring a lot of contrast back into the image as well. This is just a starting point that I use to begin the actual edit and begin processing forward from here. From there, I'm going to go ahead and jump into this basic panel. And if you look here up at our histogram, you'll see down here, it says blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights, and whites. Each one of those sections of this histogram corresponds to these sliders down here. Now, what you want to keep in mind is the contrast slider applies all the way across it and will stretch the histogram. So if I go and apply a bunch of contrast, it's going to start stretching that histogram. You can see that there. Whereas if I pull a bunch of contrast back, it's going to do the exact opposite. Now, me personally, I don't generally add contrast to the image right off the bat. I want to adjust a few things first and then kind of slowly bring contrast back into the image. And I'm going to show you guys how I do that here next. Before I get started down here, I'm going to grab my temperature slider and I want to bring this up. I want to add some warmth back into this image. I'll go to about 7,400. That looks pretty good. And now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to look at the image and kind of see where I need to start adjusting these sliders to make this image balanced. Now, what I do is I come up here and I turn on shadow clipping warning and highlight clipping warning, and those together are going to show me where I've clipped data in either the shadows or the highlights, and they're going to tell me ultimately what adjustments I need to make right up front to make the image well balanced and be able to bring it into Photoshop to begin the dual process. So the blue areas here that are all glowing are showing me that I have clipped data in my shadows, and ultimately my shadows are just way too dark in these areas. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab shadows, and we're going to bring this up to about 35. 36 works. And then I see that I'm still clipping data in these dark areas, so I'm going to grab the black slider. I'm going to bring this up to about 30. You can see that just in those two adjustments, I've eliminated all of that blue. Now, if we zoom into a pixel level, you'll see you might still have a little bit, but don't worry too much about that. What you're really trying to do is eliminate the large areas that are making up the image. You don't want to have a bunch of clipped shadows, because a good balance of highlights and shadows are going to make the image stand out. It's going to add depth. So we don't want to eliminate our shadows, but we also don't want to darken them down too much to where we lose detail. So from there, what we're going to do is come up here and I'm going to grab this exposure slider and I'm just going to turn this up just a bit. We'll go to about a quarter. And you can see just in these couple adjustments now, we're really starting to balance out this image. And the reason why we want to shoot in RAW is because it gives us the ability to do all this and not damage the image. This is all non-destructive right now, so we can come in here and we can move these sliders all over the place, hit done, open the image back up tomorrow, move them all over the place again, and get a different result every time without actually damaging the data. This is a big reason why you want to be shooting RAW. Looking at the image overall, it looks pretty good. It looks like I've brought a lot of the detail back in these shadows. It looks like I have good detail over here in my sky, and I'm not clipping highlights anywhere. And the way that you can tell if you're clipping highlights, I'll go ahead and crank the exposure way up here so you can see that. If I go too far on my highlights, they're going to glow red like this. And it's going to tell me that I have over brightened an area of the sky. Now, if you bring an image in and it has a bunch of red all over the place, that means that you've more than likely clipped the data out in the field. And depending on how severe the data is clipped, it may or may not be recoverable. So you want to be mindful of that when you're out there shooting in the field. Be checking the histogram. Don't worry so much about the meter. You want to be watching your histogram and paying attention to make sure that you're getting the best data possible. From this point, I'm going to go and move down through the rest of these panels, kind of explain what I do and the adjustments that I make to these images as we go along. So far in here, this looks pretty good. I'm going to leave this as it is for the moment. Now, curves, I don't generally apply curves into the image when I'm editing in Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm not really going to do anything with this. Detail, this is where I do a little bit of sharpening right up front to try to get the very best quality image I can into Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring my radius down to 0.5. Bring my detail up to 100. And then holding the Alt key, we're going to grab this masking slider and we're going to start pulling this. And you'll see all those little dots all over the image. It looks like noise, and that's because it is. And we're going to pull this until we eliminate the majority of them. Now what we've done is we've managed to sharpen the details of the image without sharpening the noise. So it's a little bit of front-end sharpening that helps us in getting the best data possible to bring into Photoshop. From there, I jump down to optics. I don't really do anything with color mixer or color grading. And I always turn on remove chromatic aberration. This is optional. If you don't want to turn it on, you don't have to, but I personally always turn on remove chromatic aberration just in case. And you can always identify aberrations by fringe colors in an image. Doesn't look like I really have any here, but you can definitely identify them very quickly if you have them in an image. They'll usually glow a purple or a green around very high contrast areas of your image. Just be mindful of them and always just turn on remove chromatic aberration just to eliminate them. Adobe Camera Raw does a very good job of getting rid of them and keeping them out of the image. Now you'll see remove profile or use profile corrections here. I go ahead and I turn that on. You can see that it made the image feel a bit more natural. I'll go ahead and turn it off here so you can see the before and then the after. And this takes out the distortion introduced by the lens when you're out there shooting. All lenses are going to produce some degree of distortion, whether it's a telephoto lens compressing everything or a wide angle lens stretching everything. It's going to produce some degree of distortion. So just something to be mindful of when you're out there shooting these different images. They are going to distort to a degree, and using profile corrections can correct that for you. Next, you can come down here into geometry. This is what you would generally use if your horizon was uneven and you had something that maybe is tilted a little bit or the image doesn't feel right. You'd come in here and you could use geometry to level your horizon or take some of that tilt out of the image. The one thing that will make an incredible landscape photo feel off and just unnatural is an uneven or unlevel horizon. So just be mindful of that when you're out there shooting in the field. And then I don't do anything with effects. We'll come in here to calibration. And this is where I set some of the color balance for my image. The first thing I want to do is grab my red primary, and I'm going to bring this up by, we'll go about 30. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I have red in my sky here because it's a sunrise. So I want to boost some of that color in my sunrise and bring some of that to life. Remember, I shot in a flat profile, so it's up to me to bring this color back, but I'm going to bring it back the way that I feel it should be applied. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up the greens a little bit. We'll bring these up by about 15. And I see that I have some blue here in my clouds. The foreground is a little bit on the blue side, so I'm not really going to do much with the blue primary. I think I'm actually going to turn it down by probably about 5. And the reason being is because I've noticed that when you're shooting sunrises and sunsets right at this transition point between blue hour and golden hour, you're going to get a shade of blue and a shade of orange. And the blue can very quickly overpower that warmer color palette. And I try to be very mindful of that as I'm editing forward in these scenarios. Now, with my calibration set, I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to add contrast just a little bit and see what we can do with just getting a little bit added back in here. And that looks pretty good. I don't want to overdo it. This is a global contrast adjustment, so we don't want to just come in here and crank on that contrast slider and add contrast to the whole image. Our goal here is to tastefully bring contrast back while simultaneously keeping the image looking as natural as possible. And I think that this does a pretty good job overall. I mean, so far the image has come a long ways from when we first brought it in and looks substantially better already. I do think I'm going to come over here and I'm going to bring a little bit more warmth into the image. We'll go to about 7700. And overall, I think that looks pretty good. Now, guys, remember when we first brought this image in, it looked basically like this. And with just a few adjustments, we've already brought it back to a pretty good looking photo. But there's still a few other things we have to do in Photoshop before it's done. Before you go ahead and open your image, if you're following along on your computer or if you're using Bridge or Adobe Camera Raw for the first time, yours is most likely just going to say open like this. I prefer to open images as smart objects. The reason being is because it gives me full control over the blending process in Photoshop. And that is really what our end goal is to blend this image to make a final photo with a well-balanced foreground and a well-balanced sky. My settings here in Adobe Camera Raw are to always open the images as smart objects. If you don't have that option and yours only says open like this, you can just click this drop down and select open as object, and it will go ahead and open as a smart object. Let's go ahead and open this up in Photoshop, and we'll start on the next portion of the edit. All right, guys, so we have the image opened up in Photoshop here, and I want to go and walk you guys through my thought process once I get to this point in the edit. The first thing I'm going to do is begin naming layers. So I want to name this one foreground. And then we're going to go in here and we're going to duplicate this, but we're going to duplicate it using new smart object via copy. We're going to come in here and we're going to name this one sky. And the reason why we want to duplicate this using new smart object via copy is because if you just come in here and hit Command or Control J and duplicate this layer, the layer up top that is duplicated, whatever changes you make to that layer will happen to the one below it as well. They'll be linked. We don't want that. We want to have two separate smart objects in here to start this editing process. So now that we have them, we can go ahead and begin bringing the two images together to make a cohesive final image. And what I'm meaning by that is bringing in a colorful, vibrant sky with a well-balanced foreground. Now, what I want to do is go up here to select. We're going to choose sky. You can see that Photoshop does a pretty good job of selecting the sky region of the photo. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on my sky smart object, and we're going to select this guy right here. The square with the circle will apply a layer mask. This is your masking control here. So you just hit that. It's going to apply that selection we just had to a layer mask. And basically what that is going to allow us to do is make changes to this layer that will affect our sky while leaving our foreground alone. We can tell that because the white portion of this layer is showing just the sky. White is going to reveal and black is going to conceal. So we can come in here now and we can double click on this smart object for the sky, and it's going to bring us right back into Adobe Camera Raw. You can come over here and click on the basic panel, and now I can start making adjustments specifically to the sky region of the photo. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a bit more contrast in here. We'll bring this up to about 25. Maybe bring up the exposure by just a bit. My pen is lagging for some reason, so I apologize that it kind of jumps there. Bring up the exposure. It looks pretty good. And then I'm actually going to come in here and I think I'm going to add, or rather subtract, a little bit of this warmth out. We were at 7,700, I believe, so we'll go to about 7,300. Try to balance these blues and these oranges in the sky. All in all, that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to come over here and hit OK. And you'll see that it's a very subtle change, but there is a change in the sky. If I turn the sky layer off, you'll see that it looks just like the image we imported in. And now when I turn it back on, you can see that there are some changes here in the sky. Now keep in mind, we are looking to do subtle changes. We don't want to make big global sweeping edits because it's going to ultimately ruin the image. It's going to just make things that you might not want to be affected, and then it could crunch shadows or blow highlights, and all kinds of crazy things could start happening. So just be mindful that you want to be making subtle edits and stay focused on localized edits as opposed to big sweeping global ones. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the same thing for the foreground. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to double click the foreground. So what I'm going to do is bring up my shadows just a little bit more, bring them up to about 45. We'll go to 46 on this one too. And then on the black slider, we'll bring this up to about 40. If I can get it to lock in there. There we go. And then I'm going to put some more contrast in here. The reason why I'm adding more contrast is because I've brought up my shadows and my black slider. So now that I've lightened those shadows a little bit, I can add a little bit more contrast into the image without crushing them down. And that's very important because as we're working on these photos, we want to be mindful that things closer to the camera are going to be more contrasty, and things farther from the camera, such as this long row of trees here, they're going to have less contrast. So you want to keep the contrast on your subject and keep the contrast on the actual area of the image that's closest to the camera. I think this looks pretty good overall, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. From here, we're going to go ahead and create something that is called a layer stamp. Now, the way you create a layer stamp is Control-Alt-Shift-E if you're using a PC, or Command-Control-Shift-E if you're using a Mac. And what it's going to do is it's going to create this layer here that is ultimately going to act as our new background layer. This is going to be the base of our edit. So I come in here and I just name it base. And I know that everything from this point forward and all the layers that we add above, this is going to be treated as my background layer. So with that in mind, I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to lock the base layer so I can't make any edits on it. And I'm going to come up here and this layer is going to be called healing. Now, this is an important layer for me personally in my workflow because it's telling me and showing me that this is the layer that I intend to begin cleaning the photo up with. To do that, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select the Spot Healing Brush tool. You can do that by pressing J on your keyboard or just grabbing it over here out of your tools. And what I want to do is take a look at the image and really kind of dissect what is and isn't contributing to my shot. In this case, I'm going to start right up front here with these hot pixels that came in. And this is pretty common. You'll see these on just about every camera, but I've got a few glaring ones down here that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to come through and just look around, make sure that I've gotten all of those hot pixels out of this region. It looks like there's a red one right there. Look over here. Looks like those may have been the only ones. Oh, there's a green one right up here. That looks pretty good. Another one right there. It looks like overall we've got the majority of them that would be otherwise obvious out of the image. Now I see that I've got this building and this light back here on the horizon. I'm going to come through, and there's actually a couple more hot pixels right up here too, so we're going to take those out. But I'm also going to come through and I'm going to take out this building and mostly this light. I'm not necessarily worried about the building as much as I am just wanting to get that light out of there. Go over this area a couple times to blend that in nicely. That looks pretty good. Looks like there's another hot pixel right there. Another one down here. All right. Zoom back out and take a look at that. All in all, I think it looks really good at this point. I'm not really too concerned with any of these smaller hot pixels that are way in the background there. You'll more than likely never notice them, and most people never would. But what I want to do at this point is just kind of take a second, look at the image, and kind of take it all in and see what's contributing and what's taking away from my final image here. The one thing that I am noticing is that this rock at the very bottom here isn't going all the way into the corner. I want that rock to kind of round out this corner and bring the viewer from the lower left into the frame and then up into this region of the sky. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to open up the crop tool. You click on the image, and then it's going to bring up the rule of thirds like this. Go ahead, you can grab a corner, just kind of bring that in just a little bit to start. We'll move this over a little, about like that. I feel like that looks pretty good. We've got a nice line coming from the lower left. We've got our subject here on the right that kind of leads up into these clouds, and you can see this nice sunrise in the background. We're going to go ahead and hit the check. That's going to apply that crop, and we've brought everything in to the image and balanced it out much better than it was before. Now from here, we're going to go ahead and make a few local edits that I feel the image could use that are just really overall going to make it feel a bit more balanced and bring a little bit more contrast into the final shot. So what I want to do is go over here and we're going to look at this panel. This panel is Lumenzia. Lumenzia uses luminosity masks to create and select regions of your image based on their luminosity. If you're familiar with the zone system, it's essentially the same thing, where 0 is going to be our very darkest areas, and 10 is going to be our very brightest areas with variations in between. This plugin is created by Greg Benz of Greg Benz Photography, and I recommend this plugin to everyone. It is by far one of the best tools that any Photoshop user can have in their arsenal of random tools, plugins, filters, all that stuff. If there's one thing that you're going to get, I definitely recommend getting Lumenzia. It makes editing images so much easier and so much more fun, and just way more intuitive than going in here and trying to use a brush or select things manually. It makes a world of difference. I believe it's $40 on his website at the time of this video, that is. If you want to really dive into this, he has some great courses that he offers with it. All in all, fantastic plugin. I'm not sponsored by him. I'm not affiliated with Greg at all, but I just highly recommend this product. He did a fantastic job on this. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use Lumenzia to begin editing the shot here. So the first thing I want to do is bring a bit more color and contrast into this region of my sky. You can see it looks good, but it could use a little bit more contrast and a little bit more color. Everything is starting to get color, but it's still a little flat to a degree. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring some color into this. Now I'm going to go ahead and select Light Midtones 2, which is going to select this in white. And if it's white, it's going to be affected by the luminosity mask. If it's black, it will not be affected. So I started with lighter midtone masks 2, and I think I'm going to actually go up to lighter midtone masks 1, and that looks a little bit better. I'm really selecting a lot of this region without grabbing these darker clouds, but I have the water selected here too, and we want to make sure that we're bringing everything together nicely. Everything has to look like it belongs. We don't want to have a really dark, punchy sky with a flat foreground, because that's just not going to look right at all. So I think the lighter midtones 1 is going to work well here. I'm going to go ahead and select this, which is a hue saturation lightness adjustment. I'm going to punch up the saturation a little bit. We'll go up to about 10. You can see that that nice subtle change brought a good amount of color back into these clouds back there. If I turn it off, zoom in here, what I'm really targeting is this region right in here. So if I turn this back on, you can see that I've brought a good amount of color back in, but I also haven't started making this over here cartoony. I'm not getting weird outlines on things. And that's really the power of these luminosity masks, is you can come in here and start doing these local adjustments and not having to go back and erase things or go through a bunch of masks or struggle trying to get rid of weird halos and things like that. So now that we've added a little bit more color in there, I want to go back and add a little bit more contrast to that area as well. So we're going to select the light midtones 1 again. And I'm going to come over here and we're going to do brightness contrast. Same thing, we'll double click it and we will bring a little bit of contrast in here. I'm actually going to go way overboard on this, see if I can show you guys. It's not really going to do it. I was hoping to be able to show you guys how it's only selected that region. Let me see if I can do it on this one. So right now our saturation is still at 10, but if I crank this all the way up, you can see that the foreground isn't affected. It's just the region that Lumenzia had selected. Now I'll set this back to 10. We'll come back to contrast, And that's the same exact thing that this contrast adjustment is doing, guys. It's only selecting that region. So between these two, I've effectively adjusted the sky, brought the color back in, added a good amount of contrast to it, and overall made it look a lot better than it did when I first brought the image in from Adobe Bridge. Now, one last little thing here to keep organized. I'm actually going to come in here and we're going to click the folder icon, and I'm going to name this Sky, and I put ADJ for adjustments. We're going to grab these two. We're just going to drop them right into that folder and collapse that. Now I know that my sky adjustments are all in here, and I can turn them off collectively all at the same time if I want to. Or if I want, I can come in here and I can adjust the opacity of these. I can adjust the fill. All in all, just a much easier way to stay on top of things as you go through the edit. Now that I've got my sky all balanced out, I want to come in and I want to do a couple things here on the foreground. So I'm going to come in, and I know that the light midtone mask selected this region of the sky, and this is a darker foreground still. So I'm going to select dark 3. You can see this is all white in here, and Lumenzia has done a fantastic job of selecting this, but I want to go ahead and adjust this a little bit further. So I'm going to go to dark 4. I want to see what dark 5 looks like. I think I'm going to end up with dark 4 because it really grabs these shadow areas here in the image, but it also kind of extends out here a little. So we're going to get a nice blend on this, but I'm actually not going to be doing any of the adjustment layers to start. What I want to start with is a dodge burn layer. So we're going to go ahead and open up dodge burn, and using my brush, I'm going to hit X to change my foreground color and background color. So I'm going to change it to white. So I begin to dodge and brighten areas. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to reduce the size of the brush using the bracket keys. And I think I'm going to set my opacity to 30% by pressing 3 on the keyboard. You'll see up here my opacity is now 30%. I'm going to bring my flow down to 60%. I did that by holding Shift and pressing 6. Now, with my opacity at 30 and my flow at 60, it's not just going to immediately brighten everything up to 100%. I'm going to have to gradually bring it in. And again, subtle adjustments. This is what we're looking to do here. So I'm going to come in and I'm just going to kind of go over this shadow area that could use a little touch of brightening. Kind of move around a little. Just find these much darker shadow areas and brighten them up just a bit so that they match with the rest of the foreground. I think this may be a little much, but I'll show you guys how to fix that in just a moment here. We're going to go through and finish going through these areas, brightening all this up. Maybe a little bit over here too. All in all, that looks pretty good. So, I zoom out. I'm going to turn this layer off to see what changes I've made. You can see I've brightened those shadow areas quite substantially with this dodge burn layer. Now, I kind of feel like I may have gone a little too far on those areas. So I'm going to come over here and select opacity. I'm going to bring this down to about 70%. I'm going to turn it off, turn it back on. I think I'm going to go a little bit lower. We'll go to 55. I think that looks a bit better. We don't want to over brighten our shadows because remember, we want to maintain detail in our shadows, but we don't want to brighten them to the point where it's just glaringly obvious that there are no shadows in our image. So I always come through and I turn the layer on and off a couple times, just look at it to see what changes are being made and make sure that they still feel right in the image. From there, knowing that this is dark 4, I'm going to come back and I'm going to select dark 5. And I'm going to do a brightness contrast adjustment on this as well. Double click that. We'll add some contrast into this here by probably about 10. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to turn it off and on again. That looks pretty good. Now, again, we're doing subtle adjustments that are just really here to help balance the image. At this point, we've edited the shot down here in the smart objects to bring the sky and the foreground together in a dual processing manner. So we've, again, edited the sky and the foreground separately and then started at a base layer. We fixed that layer, we adjusted the sky, and now we're balancing the foreground out. So you guessed it, we're going to put another folder in here, and I'm going to name this one foreground. We're going to do ADJ for adjustments. We'll select these two and we'll drop them right into that folder. Now we've got our foreground adjustments and our sky adjustments. They're both there, equally accessible, ready to go. Now, looking at this, I feel like I still have a touch of blue in my foreground that I'm really not too thrilled about. So I'm going to come up, we're going to go to dark 3. And I think I'm actually going to go with this because I see that it's selected some of these clouds too. And I'm going to actually do a color balance adjustment on this. And I'm going to try to bring some of that blue out. I want to try to make this just a bit warmer here. So we're going to go in. We'll take a little bit out of our blues and the midtones. We really want to look at them under the shadow portion here. You don't want to make gigantic leaps. You just kind of want to go a few points at a time and look to see what changes are being made. At this point, I'll generally tick the preserve luminosity tick box here just to check and make sure if it's worth having it on or not. It's really situational if you have that on or off. In this case, I think it's going to work better on. And I think I'm going to come back to my midtones and I'm actually going to adjust this again to about half of what we had, about -5. Put a little bit more yellow in the image here, especially in this foreground. You can see with just this little adjustment, we've taken the image from a very cold feeling to a much warmer one with just making an adjustment to the midtones, pulling yellow from blue, and the shadows, pulling a bit more yellow from the blue. We're going to go ahead and check this one more time. I think that looks pretty good. At this point, you can basically move forward with whatever creative edits you might want to apply to the final image. That could be an Orton effect, that could be soft glow, that could be a vignette, it could be countless different things that you might find interesting as, you know, finishing touches on an image. I generally do apply different effects at this point, but this image I feel doesn't really need them. It kind of has a natural vignette around it through the clouds and the dark foreground here that kind of leads into the brighter rocks and ultimately over here into this nice sunrise. The leading lines are all kind of pointing this way and bringing the viewer from the left up into the center of the photo and then over here into the rest of this detail. So at this point, I'm not really going to look at applying a vignette or doing any type of soft glow effects or anything like that. I think all in all, the image looks pretty good just the way it is. So that's it, guys. That's really what my process looks like and what my process from start to finish looks like in bringing an image from Bridge into Adobe Camera Raw and ultimately into Photoshop to go ahead and begin the editing process and finish the edit. I do hope that this has helped you guys in some way. There are going to be more videos coming in the future about this, so stay tuned for those. If you have questions, comments, anything at all, just put them in the comment section below, and I will get to you guys as quickly as I can. But as always, I appreciate you watching the video. Thank you for taking your time to go through this with me, and stay tuned because there'll be many more videos coming out in the future. But until then, thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.